I found my wife's affair with our lawyer, and now she's claiming I forged her signature on a $300, $0 property transfer to cover her affair, and I just found out the truth after she vanished with the money. I never thought I'd be the guy writing a story like this, but here I am. The most shocking thing I ever found out. My wife, Lisa, was cheating on me with our lawyer, and I only figured it out after she disappeared with $500,000 and started claiming I forged her signature on a property transfer. Honestly, I still can't wrap my head around how everything spiraled so fast. It all started with little signs that I brushed off at first. Things like her being secretive with her phone, late nights that turned into full-blown disappearances, and her suddenly acting like she was hiding something. I mean, I knew she was bitchy sometimes, but I didn't think she'd cheat on me or lie about something this huge. Lisa and I had been married for about 10 years. We met in college, and she was always a bit of a bitch, sharp-tongued, quick to throw a tantrum, but also incredibly beautiful and charming. When she wanted to be. I loved her, or at least I thought I did. Things had been good enough, but the last year or so, I started noticing her pulling away. She'd be distracted, answering her phone in secret, and ignoring me more often than not. She'd get defensive when I asked about her late nights or her sudden interest in some lawyer named Mark. She said he was just helping her with some legal stuff about the house, but I could tell there was more to it. One night I was at home, sitting in the living room when I noticed her phone buzzing on the coffee table. I usually don't look at her stuff, but something made me glance at the screen. It was a text from Mark, something about meeting up and covering the last details, and then a string of emojis that I definitely didn't want to interpret. My stomach sank. I looked closer and her phone had been unlocked. I saw a few more messages, flirty, suggestive, and way too personal for a lawyer-client relationship. It was obvious she was having an affair. The way she lied to me about just talking to Mark about. The house felt so damn transparent now. I didn't confront her that night. I just sat there furious and hurt trying to process what I just found out. I started digging through her emails, her texts, her social media. It wasn't long before I found even more, photos of her and Mark together, holding hands at some restaurant, even a few explicit messages she'd sent him. That's when I knew I had to do something. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Lisa had been lying to me for months, maybe longer. And the worst part, she'd convinced herself she was right, like she could cheat and lie her way out of it, even blame me for her infidelity. The next day I planned to confront her. I didn't want to go nuclear right away, but I knew I had to get to the truth. I waited until she came home from work, trying to keep my cool. When she finally walked in, I just looked at her. She looked annoyed, like she'd been caught doing something she knew she shouldn't. I asked her outright, about Mark, about the texts, about the late nights. She rolled her eyes, scoffing at me, telling me I was paranoid, that I was imagining things. She even said, "You're just insecure, Stephen. It's not like I'm cheating. You're overreacting because you're jealous." That's when I lost it. I told her I knew she'd been lying, that I had proof, and that I wasn't going to let her ruin us over some stupid affair. But then things got even crazier. She started crying, claiming I was accusing her of something she hadn't done, that I was just paranoid because I didn't trust her. She threw in some classic lies, saying Mark was just a friend, that she was only talking to him about the house, that I was imagining things. Her tone was bitchy, dismissive, like I was just some jealous husband overreacting. I could see the contempt in her eyes, like she thought I was just some idiot who couldn't see what was right in front of him. I was furious, but also heartbroken. I realized I was losing her, maybe forever. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything, her lies, her cheating, the way she dismissed my feelings. I started to feel this cold rage building inside me, because if she was lying about this, what else was she hiding? And then it hit me, her recent behavior around money. She'd been pushing for a bigger house, talking about investments, and suddenly she was very interested in some property deals. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I remembered she'd been pressuring me to sign some papers. I didn't think much about it until I looked closer. That's when I found out she'd actually transferred a $300, $0 property into her name, forging my signature to do it. That was the moment I knew she was capable of anything. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. I started digging deeper, and that's when I found out she'd been hiding a lot. She'd been funneling money into her own accounts, making deals behind my back, and somehow, she even managed to cover her tracks on the property transfer. But the biggest shock, I discovered she'd been secretly meeting with Mark at some luxury hotel, and she'd been planning to run away with the money all along. I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. The woman I loved, the woman I married, had turned into a lying, cheating con artist, and I was left with nothing but the wreckage of what I thought was our life together. After I uncovered the property transfer, everything changed for me. It was like a switch flipped inside my head. I started to see her for who she really was, this bitchy, manipulative woman who thought she could get away with anything. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted any chance of saving what was left of my life, or at least getting some justice. The problem was, I wasn't exactly sure what to do next. The legal mess was complicated and I wasn't a lawyer. I just knew I had to find out everything she'd done, piece by piece, and then decide how to handle it. I decided to hire my own lawyer, someone I could trust. I went to a guy I'd known from work, Mark, who had some experience in property law and fraud cases. I didn't tell him everything at first, just enough to get advice on how deep I was in. As I explained, his face turned serious, and he told me that forging signatures on property transfers was a serious crime. He said I might be able to challenge the transfer, but I'd need evidence, proof that she forged my signature or that I was coerced. That's when I realized I had to dig into her financial records, her emails, her phone logs, and I had to do it quickly before she vanished with the money for good. I started going through her emails, bank statements, and texts. It was a nightmare. I found dozens of messages with Mark, some explicit, some just flirtatious. I also discovered she'd been withdrawing money from our joint account, money she claimed was for investments, but I knew better. She'd been funneling it into secret accounts, probably to fund her escape. I even found a note she'd written to herself, planning to leave town with Mark once she had enough money. That was the moment I knew she'd planned this for a while. She'd been lying, cheating, and stealing from me for months without me even suspecting. I confronted her again, this time more aggressively. She was at her worst, bitchy, dismissive, and full of lies. I told her I had evidence of her affair, her fraud, and her plans to run away. Her face twisted, and she started lying even more, saying she'd never cheated on me, that Mark was just a business associate, and that I was crazy for thinking she'd do something so terrible. She looked at me with that contemptuous smirk like she thought I was just some insecure fool. But I knew better now. I knew she was lying, and I knew she was capable of anything. That's when she dropped the biggest bombshell yet. She claimed I forged her signature on the property transfer, said I'd forced her, manipulated her, and that she'd never signed anything. She was spinning this wild story about how I'd been abusive, controlling, and how I'd forced her into signing those papers. It was her way of gaslighting me, of trying to turn the tables, but it didn't work. I had the evidence, bank records, emails, witness statements. I knew she was lying. Still, her words hit me hard. I felt a mix of anger and helplessness. How could she do this? How could she lie so easily, so convincingly? I felt betrayed not just by her actions but by her entire personality. She'd become someone I didn't recognize. Then she disappeared, just like that. One day she was there and the next. Her things were gone, no phone calls, no emails, no explanations. I looked everywhere, her car, her phone, her social media, nothing. She'd vanished with the money with her new lover, Mark. I was left with chaos, a mountain of evidence, and a broken heart. I felt numb, then furious, then desperate. I knew she'd run away, but I also knew she'd left a trail. I had to find her, had to get the money back, and had to make her pay for what she'd done. The entire situation was surreal. The woman I loved, the woman I married, had become this manipulative, lying thief. And I was stuck trying to pick up the pieces of a life that felt like it was crumbling every second. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, frantic searches, and mounting anger. I hired a private investigator, thinking maybe she'd slipped up somewhere, maybe she'd contact someone, or leave a trail. I stayed up late poring over her bank statements, trying to connect the dots. Every little detail fed into the growing realization that Lisa wasn't just running away with Mark and the money. She had planned this entire thing for months. She'd lied about everything, even her own feelings. She played me like a fiddle, convincing me she was just stressed or overwhelmed when in reality she was orchestrating her escape. The pie came back with some shocking intel. Lisa had been spotted at a luxury hotel in the city, checking in under a fake name. She'd been seen meeting with Mark more than once, and they appeared to be planning something big. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I thought I knew, was actually living a double life, one filled with lies, cheating, and theft. The images of her with Mark, holding hands, sharing drinks, planning their future, those haunted me. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. My mind kept circling around the same questions. How could she do this? How could she betray me so completely? Then I found out she'd been trying to sell some of our joint assets, furniture, jewelry, even the house, trying to raise more cash to fund her escape. Luckily, I had already frozen our joint accounts so she couldn't drain everything. But she had managed to transfer the property into her name, forging my signature. That was the most infuriating part. I kept asking myself, how did she pull it off? How did she forge my signature without me noticing? And I realized she'd been so manipulative, so convincing, that I'd been blind to her lies all along. I felt like an idiot. I decided I couldn't just sit around anymore. I had to take action. I gathered all the evidence I had, screenshots, bank statements, her texts, the pie's reports, and went straight to my lawyer. Together, we drafted a legal complaint to challenge the property transfer, claiming forgery and fraud. We also filed a report with the police about the theft and her disappearance. I'd never been more pissed in my life. I wanted her to pay physically, financially, emotionally. I wanted her to understand that you can't just cheat, steal, and lie your way out of everything. I was ready to fight for my rights, even if it meant tearing her apart in the process. Meanwhile, Lisa was still missing. No calls, no messages. It was like she evaporated into thin air. I kept thinking about how she'd always been so bitchy, so full of herself, and now she was just gone. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry beyond words. Every time I looked at the house, I saw her face, her sneering, dismissive expression, and it made my blood boil. I kept replaying all the moments she lied, all the times she dismissed my concerns, all the times I ignored the little warning signs. She'd been screwing around, lying, stealing, and somehow she thought she could get away with it. And then, just when I thought I had seen the worst, I found out she'd been planning her escape even further. She opened a secret bank account, transferred a large chunk of the stolen money into it, and was preparing to disappear forever. I couldn't believe how cold and calculating she'd become. It was like she'd turned into a different person, someone I didn't even recognize anymore. I started to question everything about our marriage, about who Lisa really was. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, respect, and whether I was ever truly with the woman I married. Looking back, I realize how naive I'd been. I thought love could fix everything, but this betrayal showed me otherwise. I'm still trying to process it all, the shock, the heartbreak, the rage. The worst part is knowing she's out there somewhere, probably laughing at how she pulled this off. But I'm not giving up. I'm going to fight for what's mine, for the truth, and for the justice I deserve. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that some people, especially the ones you trust the most, will stab you in the back the hardest. And I'll be damned if I let her get away with it. By now, I was completely consumed with the need to bring her back, to make her face the consequences of what she'd done. I couldn't stand the thought of her running off with our money, with Mark, and just leaving me in the dust. So I kept pushing, digging into every lead I could find. I hired a private investigator again, and this time he found something even more shocking. Lisa had been spotted at the airport buying a one-way ticket to some foreign country. I couldn't believe it. She was trying to disappear forever, probably planning to start some new life, maybe with Mark, maybe with the stolen money. I remember the day I found out. It was a cold, rainy afternoon when the pie called me with the news. I sat there stunned, staring at the phone. My hands were trembling. All those months of lies, betrayal, and theft, they all hit me at once. And now she was actually trying to run away, without a word, without a goodbye. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach all over again. How could she do this? How could she think she could just walk away from everything she destroyed? That's when I decided I had to do something drastic. I couldn't let her get away with it. I contacted the authorities, told them about her forged signature, her theft of the property, and her attempt to flee the country. I also filed a restraining order, something to keep her from leaving the country until we sorted everything out. I knew it wouldn't stop her completely, but it was a start. I also contacted the bank and froze every account she had access to, trying to prevent her from laundering the rest of the money. I wasn't going to let her take what was rightfully mine without a fight. While all this was happening, I was still trying to piece together her plans. I found out she'd been in contact with some shady people, people who specialized in helping wealthy women like her vanish. I even discovered she'd been researching fake passports and offshore accounts. That's when I realized she'd been planning this escape for months, maybe even years. She'd been slowly building her getaway, and I was just too blind to see it. The anger and frustration boiled over. How could I have been so stupid? How did I miss all the signs? I thought I knew her, but she'd become someone else entirely. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about trust, betrayal, and the fact that I'd been played for a fool. I started questioning everything: our marriage, her loyalty, my own judgment. But I also knew I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I had to fight. I reached out to legal experts, financial investigators, and even some contacts I had in law enforcement. I wanted to track her down, stop her from running, and get back what she'd stolen. I told myself I'd do whatever it took to bring her back, to hold her accountable. That night, I sat alone in the house, feeling emptier than I ever had. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had turned into a master manipulator and thief. And I was left with nothing but the wreckage she'd left behind. I looked around at the empty rooms, the empty promises, and the shattered trust. I kept asking myself, how did it come to this? How did I go from a happy marriage to this nightmare? And deep down, I knew the answer. I'd ignored the warning signs, dismissed her bitchy attitude, and trusted her too much. Now I was paying the price. But I also knew I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. Not by a long shot. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became that Lisa had been planning this whole escape for months. I found emails and encrypted messages she thought were hidden from me, discussing how to fake her identity, open offshore bank accounts, and even buy a new house in a country with no extradition treaty. Every new piece of evidence fueled my rage. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was actively trying to wipe herself clean, erase her past, and leave me holding the bag. I felt betrayed on every level: emotionally, financially, legally. I decided I needed to act fast, so I contacted a top-notch lawyer who specialized in financial crimes and international law. We drafted a detailed lawsuit challenging the property transfer, citing forgery, fraud, and conspiracy. I also filed criminal charges against her for theft and forgery. I told the lawyer I wanted her found, and I wanted her to face the consequences. I even hired a forensic accountant to trace the stolen money, every withdrawal, every transfer, every offshore account she'd set up. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but I was determined to get her caught. Meanwhile, I kept thinking about how she'd always been bitchy, manipulative, and full of herself. She'd always claimed she was smarter than everyone else, that she knew how to get what she wanted. And now I saw how true that was. She'd outsmarted me at every turn, right down to forging my signature and planning her escape. It made me sick to my stomach. I started to question everything about our marriage, about her character, about whether I ever truly knew her. I also wondered how many other lies she'd told, how many other secrets she'd kept from me. One night, I got a call from the Pi. He'd tracked her to a small island country where she'd bought a house and opened a bank account in her new name. She was living the life she'd always dreamed of, wealthy, free, and completely out of my reach. I stared at the phone in disbelief. That was when I realized she'd been planning this for years, and I'd been too blind to see it. She'd been manipulating everyone: me, her lawyer, the bank, even her own family. All for this moment, to run away with what she thought was hers, to start fresh with Mark and the stolen money. That's when I decided I wasn't going to let her get away with it. I reached out to the authorities in that country, working with legal experts to freeze her assets and try to extradite her back. I knew it was a long shot, but I had to try. I also started working with the FBI, sharing all the evidence I had collected. I was determined to catch her, bring her back, and hold her accountable in court. I wasn't about to let her walk away, not after all she'd done. Throughout all this chaos, I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, betrayal, heartbreak, and a stubborn hope that justice would prevail. I kept replaying our last conversation, her bitchy smirk, and the way she dismissed me. I realized I had to accept that she'd changed. She was no longer the woman I married. But I also knew I deserved better. I deserved a life free from lies, theft, and manipulation. I promised myself I wouldn't give up until I found her, until I made her face what she'd done. Whatever it took, I was going to see this through. Because at the end of the day, I knew I wouldn't rest until I had my closure, and maybe, just maybe, some revenge. The months that followed felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I poured every ounce of energy into tracking her down, fighting legal battles across borders, and trying to recover what she'd stolen. The authorities in that island country worked with Interpol and the FBI, but getting her extradited was slow and complicated. Meanwhile, I watched her new life unfold from afar. Her social media was full of pictures of her in exotic places, living in luxury, completely detached from the mess she'd left behind. It was infuriating, but I knew I had to stay focused. Eventually, after relentless pressure and legal maneuvers, she was finally arrested in that foreign country. The process was long and exhausting, but I felt a strange sense of relief. Seeing her in handcuffs, her bitchy smirk gone, was oddly satisfying. She looked defeated, like she never expected me to fight so hard. The trial was brutal, exposing every lie, every manipulation she'd used to cover her tracks. I testified, showing all the evidence I had gathered: her forged signatures, her secret accounts, her plans to run away with the money. The judge didn't hold back. She was convicted of fraud, theft, and conspiracy to defraud. Watching her get sentenced was a strange mix of feelings. Part of me felt vindicated, justice was finally served. But part of me felt hollow, knowing she'd betrayed everything we once had. She lied, cheated, stole, and tried to run away from her own life. I realized that the Lisa I loved was gone, replaced by someone I hardly recognized. Still, I was glad I'd fought for what was right, even if it meant losing her forever. In the end, I got most of the money back. Some of it was tied up in legal fees, but I managed to recover a significant portion. The property was returned to me and I filed for divorce. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I knew staying with her was pointless. She made her choice, and I had to accept that the woman I married was gone. I moved out of the house, started therapy, and slowly began rebuilding my life. The pain of betrayal didn't disappear overnight, but I learned to live with it. Looking back, I realized that trust is fragile, and sometimes people you love can turn into strangers overnight. Lisa's betrayal taught me a harsh lesson about deception, greed, and the importance of watching for the warning signs. I wish I'd seen her true colors sooner, but I also understand now that I can't control other people's choices, only my own. I hope my story serves as a warning. Never ignore the red flags and always protect yourself, especially when money and trust are involved. As for me, I'm still healing. I've started focusing on myself, on finding happiness outside of the chaos she created. I've learned that revenge isn't always about getting even, but about reclaiming your life and dignity. I don't hate her anymore. She's made her bed and I've moved on. But I'll never forget what she did, and I'll always be cautious about who I trust. That's the bitter truth of this whole mess. Sometimes the people closest to you can hurt you the worst. And in the end, all you can do is pick up the pieces, learn from it, and try to move forward.